tremendous vibration is right under our feet. We're standing on a pan that's breaking up.
Israel NP, to CJU 942. CJU 942, Israel NP.
We've had no contact with them. We do not know whether they are lost or merely are unable to make radio contact.
We fear that the expedition may end in a tragedy.
We can only hope there is no danger. We have no way of knowing.
There's people that make things happen. There's people that watch things happen. And then there's people that wonder just what the hell happened. Ralph Plaisted, he was one of those people that made things happen.
Ralph Plaisted is the greatest modern explorer that you've never heard of.
He grew up in Bruno, Minnesota, which is just south of Duluth, which is a town of about 50, and that would be if they have company. He was one who was always the hunter and fisherman. He'd skip school just to go rabbit hunting. He wanted to go into the Navy, and he was too young, so he dropped out of school. He sold ice, he worked in a pool hall, and then he went into the Navy.
So in the fall of '44, I joined the Navy when I was 17. And a year later, they dropped a big bomb in Hiroshima. And in the fall of '45, I was discharged. Then I went in the insurance business.
Ralph is an insurance salesman, relying on his wits, relying on whatever it is that drives these sorts of people.
My dad was kind of like a nonconformist. I mean, he was always kind of hungry for an adventure, hungry for something new. Because this is who he is. He took our whole family up into the wilderness. We got dropped off with a float plane, and we lived in tents. We lived off the land for 15 months, hunted and fished and ate blueberries and all of that. His philosophy was, you don't need the push-button world. You can enjoy, just surviving.
I think we're as a family, we're very fortunate to have the chance to do something like this. And I think man has to live his dreams or he's going to be quite unhappy.
Ralph was an all-in kind of guy. If you're going to do it, you're just going to do it, whatever it takes.
Here's America's newest winter sport, snowmobiling. The vehicle is steered by skis and powered by a gasoline engine. It runs over 30 miles per hour on the level, and downhill, hang on to your mittens. This new sport, already a big hit in Canada, should snowball this winter in America.
The guy who becomes the kind of poster child for the snowmobile in rural Minnesota is Ralph Plaisted. He is an early adopter of the machine. He thinks that the snowmobile can do just about anything.
Most people had never seen a snowmobile before, and Ralph really loved his. That he suddenly decided that he was going to prove how wonderful this Skidoo was and drive it from Ely, Minnesota to St. Paul, Minnesota as a stunt for the St. Paul Winter Carnival. Which he proceeds to do without asking anyone's permission or whatever, and just heads on down, mostly following roads and running along the ditches. And he gets stopped by the highway patrol somewhere along the way, and he explains his run, and they let him go on. The highway patrol couldn't think of any particular law that kept him from doing that.
He just wanted to show that snowmobiles are going to be something big.
He didn't take no for an answer, but maybe he didn't even hear the word no. He just had an idea and just took off with it.
I think that this is the greatest American adventure story that people don't know about.
Some say it almost starts as like a joke.
An insurance salesman and a doctor met in a bar and wound up in the middle of the Arctic Ocean.
As the story goes, Ralph and his good friend Art Aufderheide were sitting at the Pickwick restaurant.
The dynamic between Ralph Plaisted and Art Aufderheide was interesting. Art was a very learned man, very literate man.
My dad is a fairly well-established, respected physician in Duluth, a pathologist, a man who collects experiences. He's a well-respected and well-known Arctic traveler also, and was headed off for a 6-week expedition with an Eskimo family. Ralph caught wind of that and said, "I'd like to talk to you about that." Art?
They were sitting here having a couple dark beers one night, and imaginations started to flow.
And Ralph proposed that we make a joint trip together with snowmobiles and dog teams.
Art wanted to go by dog team, and I was telling him all the advantages of the snowmobile over the dogs.
And then Art brings up, of course, the classic benefit to dogs, which is that if you run out of food, you can always eat your dogs, you can't eat a snowmobile.
You can see Ralph rearing up and saying, snowmobiles, that's the wave of the future. And it's snowmobiles and dog team through the evening.
Art apparently got a little tired of hearing this.
And finally he said to me, if they're as good as you say they are, let's go to the North Pole with them.
Plaisted doesn't say anything, which is the most Minnesota response to an idea ever, which doesn't mean no, it means he's actually thinking about this.
Ralph's daughter told me that when he came home that evening, he had this strange, faraway look in his eyes. And she had asked him, "Dad, what's going on?" He said, "I guess I'm going to the North Pole."
Art had to go out of town for some period of time, and when he came back, he looked in his mail, and here was an office-size envelope. The return address, there was a logo, the Plaisted Snowmobile Expedition. He looked at that, he said, "Oh my God," I think he took it seriously. This is how the greatest expedition you've never heard of began.
People look at Mount Everest as one of the most iconic adventures. Traveling to the North Pole is easily 10 times more difficult. You have extreme cold, open water, thin ice that you can fall through at any given moment, whiteouts where you can't see any sort of reference point. Basically, that environment on any given day is trying to kill you. I'm sure there's probably a lot of things that experience as an insurance salesman allows you to do in life, but probably getting to the North Pole by snowmobile isn't one of them. In the late 60s, the Arctic Ocean, the North Pole had basically been forgotten. And so you're gonna go to a place that nobody knows about, with no experience, with a machine that's just newly been invented, relatively untested, for an undefined amount of time. You're crazy.
Then as he started getting into it, you think, oh my gosh, he's actually serious about this.
Ralph, I'll start with the question, are you really going to the North Pole by snowmobile? Yes, we are. Ralph Plaisted's expedition is the first surface trip that man has attempted since 1909.
After the turn of the century, if you look at what's going on in Arctic exploration, you have Robert Peary, an incredibly competitive explorer who very much wanted to be the first person to reach the North Pole. He is the guy who has all of the money from patrons. He is incredibly networked in Washington, D.C., as well as New York.
And he had the Peary Arctic Club, which was a cluster of extremely wealthy people.
So when Peary goes to the Arctic in 1908, he goes with a massive crew. He had hundreds of dogs. He had dozens and dozens of crew members, Inuit sledge drivers, Inuit seamstresses. It was really a massive expedition. Peary comes back out of the Arctic in September of 1909. And so Peary emerges as a national hero, as the first person to reach the North Pole.
Reaching the pole was kind of the zenith of the apex of exploration. It was endorsed by Congress. It was part of the National Geographic Society history.
There's not much of a bigger contrast you can draw between two people than Robert Peary and Ralph Plaisted.
Ralph wasn't a part of like an elite patronage of explorers that had the means to be able to go back to their life if they failed. He's a self-made man. And
Ralph stepped into something that amateurs just didn't do back in the day. I mean, just an ordinary person like an insurance salesman just didn't have a chance.
What Ralph had in spades is the desire, ambition, and great connections in Minnesota.
A month later, Plaisted had this thing all set up. He started a business. He named it the Plaisted Polar Expedition.
You're calling WCCO Radio about the North Pole Expedition. Our guest is Ralph Plaisted of White Bear Lake. Ralph, what is your business other than going to the North Pole?
Well, for the last 15 years, my profession as a general agent in the insurance business in St. Paul.
Well, I feel reassured that you're in the insurance business. Apparently, you figure you got a pretty good risk share. I'm confident that we'll make it.
Eventually, all this self-promotion is enough to make it to the attention of Charles Kuralt, the CBS correspondent.
Behind the barn back in North Carolina, this is the way we used to do it.
Charles Kuralt made a name for himself based on these field segments called On the Road, in which he would profile some small bit of Americana, quirky stories that normally wouldn't make it to the mainstream news.
And we're thinking, man, this is fantastic. This is going to be documented. That was huge. Absolutely.
CBS, in spite of my fat physique and cowardly inclinations, did send me to camp out on the Lacs in the middle of the winter with some, at the time I thought them madmen. Since it's news when a few friends from Minnesota try to drive to the North Pole, CBS News went along. Their plan was to cross the ice by ski-mobile. They were not professionals. They were Dr. Arthur Aufderheide, 42, a pathologist from Duluth. Don Powelek, an electronics engineer, 38 years old, from St. Paul.
Don and Ralph were old snowmobile buddies, and he was a supreme electronics expert.
Gerald Pitzel, 33, a high school teacher who learned something about navigation in the Marines, but who'd never slept in a tent before he joined the expedition.
Let's face it was a wild idea. I'd never been on a snowmobile. I wasn't much of a camper, much less a winter camper, but the whole thing just seemed so fascinating.
Jean-Luc Bombardier, 31, of Valcourt, Quebec, a devil-may-care ski-mobile driver and nephew of the ski-mobile company president.
He was probably the best snowmobile driver in Quebec.
Oh, he was the consummate playboy.
In fact, his snowmobile's name was Les Swinger, so that kind of fit Jean-Luc.
Walt Peterson, 38 years old, the father of 5 children, a mechanical engineer from St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Somebody had said, oh, we should really have a mechanic to keep these snowmobiles running. And Dad says, yeah, give me 20 minutes to pack. And that was that.
I was elected as the mechanic and the chaplain for the crew. How come the chaplain? I know more about machines than I do about the Bible, but I'll do what I can.
The pilot is Weldy Phipps, a famous name among Arctic bush pilots.
If you're going to go to the North Pole, riding snowmobiles, you quickly figure out that you can't haul all that gas. You're going to have some of that gasoline flown out to you at intervals.
Weldy, master bush pilot, which means you're a navigator, you're a weatherman, you're a mechanic, and you're pretty much the toughest cowboy that anybody's ever met.
His hair was kind of messed up, smoked like a machine, smoke, 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 or drink, 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 drink.
For a group of guys, middle-aged guys, to say, okay, let's ride snowmobiles to the North Pole, that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
In January 1967, they were training on a frozen lake in Minnesota. practicing the skills they imagined they would put to use.
Which was kind of hilarious. It didn't even compare to the Arctic Ocean. Not at all.
All they did was just practice doing things that they thought they would encounter. Setting up camp, going up over snow ridges, traveling around the ice in their snowmobiles.
They were weekend outdoorsmen, men used to working in offices and going home at night to their families.
A number of these men had never ridden a snowmobile.
At times I thought, we're crazy. What are we doing out here? You think we're going to go to the North Pole? It was a little wild.
One of the big things on this trip they decided they should do is to see how compatible they were with one another, do a personality test. Everybody failed. This group did not belong together.
From a very humble home. The Bible was the first book, and under the Bible was the National Geographic.
One of the things that Ralph Plaisted did, and early on, he approached the National Geographic Society and said, sponsor my trip. If National Geographic picks this up, they'll legitimize this.
In the 60s and 70s, National Geographic was basically the institution that supported exploration of our planet. In 1909, Admiral Robert Peary had the support of the National Geographic Society. So this idea Ralph had of trying to get that seal of approval was probably the most important thing to him in that moment. This was a guy who dreamed around National Geographic magazines and what that magazine represented. Random guy from Minnesota got a meeting with the National Geographic, and it didn't go so well.
His idea, which he proposed to them, is that we would dedicate this trip to the North Pole, the snowmobile expedition, to the memory of Peary. As he was explaining his plan for the snowmobile expedition, one by one, they just sort of left. And toward the end, I think there was one or two guys there, and one of them said, "What makes you think you can take a bunch of your Minnesota cronies and go to the North Pole?"
I think their unwillingness to support him helped drive this sort of mission forward, where he thinks, you know what, they're not going to support a bunch of regular Joes going up to the North Pole. I'm going to show them that we can actually do this.
When everybody else said it's not logical, we probably can't do it, it's impossible, those were all the reasons he would do things. He'd say, tell me I can't do it, and I'll get it done.
So in early 1967, with preparations underway, Ralph and the team begin to chart their way to the North Pole. Their plan is to depart from a small research station called Eureka on Ellesmere Island and then travel to the North Pole, roughly 600 nautical miles away.
To try for the pole, it seems, you need, among other things, 2,500 feet of nylon rope, 125 pounds of thermal underwear, 6 ice axes, 25 pounds of plasma we hope we'll never have to use. And somewhere in all that load going aboard this big RCAF Hercules is a case of champagne. A lot of bottles Ralph Plaisted would like to leave at the North Pole, empty.
At that time, we were thinking, yeah, we'd get up there, we'd get out to base camp, we'd probably get to the North Pole in 2 weeks. Easy. Not the case.
I can't even describe the starkness of the scene there. All you see is the vapor from your breath. Everything is crystallizing and sticking on you. It's just sharp. It hurts, you know, everything kind of hurts. It's just brutal.
But all you can see is gray and black and ice, and that was my first experience with 40 below.
This is what we've worked for, and as Jerry said yesterday, we got the opportunity now. It's just a matter of weather, and if the good Lord's willing tomorrow, why, we'll be out there, and from then on, it's going to be up to us. Nobody left to help.
So I think at that point, the fun and games is over because reality sets in. They're going to be gone. They're going to be gone for, a couple months. They're putting themselves out there.
And Heavenly Father, we bow before you tonight to ask special leadership from you. Keep your hand on us, guide us, and keep us, we pray.
So at 22:15, March 28th, the Plaisted Polar Expedition leaves for the North Pole.
When they left the fjord, they were heading north. Well, when you start getting out onto the pack ice, you see this mountain of ice on the side, and you're still thinking, well, I'll just ride with my shoulder to that, and that way I know I'm always going north. They don't realize that the ice is heaved up here, and as you go a little farther, it circles back and around. They ended up making a complete U-turn out there and come right back to the same spot where they started.
I found out I wasn't a navigator when we got out there, so it wasn't exactly like reading a canoe map in northern Minnesota either. What we had done, we'd circled an iceberg.
In addition to realizing he wasn't a great navigator, Ralph also realized they brought way too much stuff.
And they also brought some whiskey to celebrate with. And for medicinal purposes, Ralph tended to like to have a little something to nip on.
I mean, it sounds like a plot line for Mad Men. These guys are on a polar expedition, and let's make sure the smokes and booze are all there. Like, why would you go anywhere without that stuff, including the North Pole?
The going is quite slow. They're facing many miles in fact of open water and jumbled ice that's running from 25 to 40 feet high.
The standard for polar travel that holds true now and held true for Plaisted is that on average you need to be making roughly 10 nautical miles a day. And Plaisted's making far less than that. And right away he runs into big pressured ice and a lead. And a lead is a crack in the sea ice that's basically open water.
When the currents and the wind are at odds, they pull this ice apart. It can be the size of the Mississippi, or it can be like a stream or a brook.
They constantly had to remind themselves that hole in the ice is 3 miles deep.
That is 14,000 feet of frozen sea below you. If you fall, you're going to die.
So you're constantly on edge as you're traveling in this environment.
Now 10 minutes after 7, Zulu time. I've crossed several cracks, pressure ridges, leads. Now we're at another lead we're kind of stymied at. This one is probably 500 feet wide. And it looks bad as far as making it across right now.
(1340 GMT, Saturday, April 8th. The North Pole is 475 miles away. For 3 days now, the expedition has traveled northeast along the shore, paralleling the big lead, but not crossing it. This is the lead that stopped Peary. He camped beside it and cursed it for a week in 1909 before it froze over thinly and he was able to move on toward the pole. At last, in the distance, there seems to be a bridge of thin ice across the lead. The machines head for that spot. The ice is 1.5 inches thick. They decide to try it. Don Powlick takes the first machine with the lightest sled out onto the lead. He can feel the thin ice bending beneath him.
Saltwater ice, when it first freezes, is flexible. You can have a couple of inches of saltwater ice and it will bend and not break.
It's like walking on a waterbed. So it can hold you if you keep moving. But there's a threshold to that, and it's a very fine margin.
The ice is just floating on the water, and it's mighty deep and cold water. You never forget that your chances in that water are very, very slim.
When we got up on shore and all the sleds were across, it hit me. And that's all the thrills you need for one day.
The Arctic is very unforgiving, uncompromising, and you work for every inch that you get up here.
1715 GMT, April 9th, the 13th day. It's taken 3 days to go 2 miles. Plaisted, taking a look, says the shortest way to it now is straight north, through the most incredible ice jumble yet.
I think people have the perception that the Arctic Ocean is sort of a white tabletop. That this thing with snow machines should be so easy. But with that ice, particularly the first half of the trip where the currents are pushing that ice up against landmass and just buckling it up into 30, 60-foot walls of ice.
It's just these jagged sheets of ice that are crashing together. Blocks the size of houses just heave like it was a kid's puzzle. There's nothing on the surface of the sea ice that looks like planet Earth.
I said, well, that's rough ice. Once we get through that, we can move. But you never get through it.
These individuals are having to really cut out a road to then go back and get on these machines, start them up, and then drive through, only to do the whole rigmarole again.
Our attention is suddenly brought to the men on the ice. In their last radio contact, they told us they were stopped by a big pressure ridge. Since then, they have failed to meet 2 consecutive radio schedules.
2 days without a radio contact, and they could be in real serious trouble.
A0NP, CJU 942, CJU 942.
That was their only connection to other human beings that could possibly help them survive.
When we try to call them, we hear only silence. Something has gone wrong.
They get in the supply plane and they go out and try and find them, not exactly sure where they were because they didn't have radio contact.
17:15 Greenwich Mean Time, Saturday, April 15th. Down there on the ice are 4 members of the expedition. Possibly, just possibly, something has gone wrong. Trouble with the radio transmitter, or worse.
This is rather a difficult thing to explain to people, just why you can't spot a party on the ice. In the jumble of rubble and pressure ridges on the polar ice, everything looks so much alike.
And we can see them now. There's a message stamped in the snow down there. It says, radio out. This is the most serious predicament the expedition has found itself in the first 3 weeks. Stopped by a huge ridge, the radio out of working order, and there's really nothing we can do about it. No place to land a plane out there to help them.
So here Plaisted is, he's up against probably the worst pressure ridge that he's come to. It's basically a wall of ice with no way through.
nobody's going to cut through that ridge, not one that size. And it's obvious, too, we aren't going to go left or right because of the mass of ice around us, so all we can do is cut up to it and literally manhandle and man-haul everything over that ridge.
Chopping ice, pushing and pulling. It's a laborious effort out there. During that period of time, the ice platform we were on actually drifted south about 4 miles. So nothing was going right.
Finally, at 04:45, April 16th, steep ice ramps up the Big Ridge have been completed, and they drive across. The Big Ridge is conquered at last. The support plane brings in food, fuel, and a new radio, and the expedition is able to proceed.
So Ralph and the team get through this huge pressure ridge. And then another really dire situation presents itself.
The ice party made little progress today due to winds. The winds were running between 15 and 25 knots.
(1400 GMT, Wednesday, April 26th, Eureka Weather Station. A swirl of snow moving along the ground. When Eskimos see this, they head for home. It means a big wind is coming.
An Arctic blow is like a ground blizzard here. It's blowing the snow where you cannot see, a foot in front of you.
It looks bad to the east, and the way the clouds are coming in and the wind is coming up and the snow is starting to move, we're going to have to tie up here pretty soon now.
The men on the ice choose the oldest, sturdiest ice floe they can find, put up their tents in the blowing snow, and prepare to wait it out.
It can blow like 100 miles an hour for days on end. That amount of pressure to the ice makes it move with great energy, and it's like giant machines clunking together.
It's opening up here, building up over there, and it sounds like an artillery barrage. It's scary.
You can hear this creaking brewing right under our feet. In fact, we can feel it under our feet now.
This ice we're standing on, is going to move back toward where we are all night long. Oh, sure. Our camp will be on a much smaller island by tomorrow morning.
This could crack right under our feet then.
Well, one saving grace about it all is that you can run faster than ice can move.
Oh, yes.
We're worried about the ice party. We haven't heard from them for 36 hours. This wind could be full of danger for them. It will be all they can do to keep their tents up in this blow.
Even if we could get radio contact, we couldn't tell them where we were. And if we did, nobody could find you when the visibility was 10 feet.
So we're going to sit it out. We're running low on food. As hungry as can be.
During the big blow, the level of misery couldn't be greater. Everyone's depressed. We probably aren't going to make it. We may not live.
Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And you don't know if you're shivering because it's 60 below or because your adrenaline and your fear is just skyrocketing.
I don't know how long before the ice breaks up. I don't know where we are. I don't know how long these tents could hold up. We know that if the tents go away, our life expectancy is pretty low. I now have to call upon the Almighty. And all I ask is that I get these men home to their families.
When you hear National Geographic telling you you don't have enough experience, it's paraded right in front of you. In a tent stuck in a storm for days on end, you have nothing else to think about except your failures.
For the last 2 days now, I've asked everyone to be fully dressed. the ice is breaking up and there's lots of open water out there. This is it.
Zero 900, May 3rd. The sun comes out.
It was getting late in the season, and the leads were getting more numerous, and the travel was getting more difficult. And as a big part of the logistics, they would have to find a flat, solid floe large enough for Weldy to land on. And if they would be unable to find such a place, they would be stranded. And I think that was one of the main reasons that Ralph decided enough is enough. We don't need to die over this.
I am not thinking of reaching the North Pole. I'm thinking only of the safety of these men.
When he made that decision, that was a very solemn moment, so to speak. He didn't want to ever be a failure at something.
I guess I have to face the facts that this year we're not going to make it to the pole.
Admiral Peary once tried to answer the question of why men go through all this. He said, "It is the physical lust of struggling with the sternest natural obstacles on the face of the globe. It is association with nature in her sternest moods. And no man with red blood in his veins ever goes north, but what returning he goes again, if possible."
I guess I have to face the facts that this year we're not going to make it to the pole.
That must have been quite an ordeal out there.
It's tough to leave it this way, but it's good everybody's off the ice without any accidents or anything, so.
Because there could have been accidents.
There certainly could. You're living with them constantly, you know.
So after the failure of the 67 expedition, Charles Kuralt starts becoming interested in Robert Peary's original claims for reaching the North Pole in his 1909 expedition. As Kuralt begins to look at the record, he becomes increasingly skeptical that Peary actually made it to the North Pole.
On the basis of Peary's claim, he would have had to have made back to land what is, I suppose, one of the fastest dog sled trips in history on any kind of ice. He claims in his return trip from the pole a speed which is phenomenal, if not superhuman.
Kuralt went so far as to fly to the North Pole with a Navy pilot to see what Peary had to tackle in order to get to the pole in that time frame.
I assume that the ice was about as it is now in 1909, and if so, how in the world did Peary manage to get across that stuff?
Well, we've given it a lot of thought, and I don't know. I think it stretches one's imagination to believe that he could make it with a dog team and a navigator that wasn't too well versed in his background. I really find it rather hard to believe.
At the same moment, the place is really beginning to feel the sense of failure, especially from the National Geographic. He begins to almost believe, maybe they were right about me. Maybe me and my Minnesota cronies aren't cut out for this type of thing. Eventually, Plaisted takes this frustration and he turns it around and he begins funding a new expedition.
When Ralph heard, "But can't be done," or "You definitely, Ralph, can't do it," that was his inspiration to say, "I can, and you can watch me."
You plan to go again?
We certainly do. We can't leave it now. We know too much.
When Ralph came home in 1967, he already knew he was going to go back in 68. So he right away got into what they can do to improve it so they can make it next year.
Ralph Plaisted is with us this afternoon. And Ralph has announced today that they will have another expedition to the North Pole. What will you have learned from the previous expedition that will help you in this next one? Well, I think one of the first things we learned was the time element. And of course, then we learned that we should move our base camp to the northernmost point to give us this time also.
The goal for starting the journey is to get as far north as possible, basically the northernmost point of land in North America. In '67, Plaisted was pretty far away from that point. And so rightly so, when he reorganized for 1968, he decided to depart from Ward Hunt, which is basically the northernmost point of land that you can possibly get to, which means he's starting from roughly the same latitude that Peary did in 1909.
In 1967, we spent 37 days on the polar ice cap, and probably the 12.5 ton of equipment defeated us as much as anything else.
68, they pared it down to what they saw as the very essentials needed to complete the journey.
Plaisted now, in 1968, is the most knowledgeable explorer on the Arctic environment on the face of the planet, even though he's just an average guy from Minnesota. And he keeps recruiting average Joes from Minnesota. In 1968, he brings on John Moriarty from Pillsbury to help with food preparation and resupplies. The base camp is the hub of any expedition, and John Moriarty's job is to make sure that the supplies go out when they're supposed to go out. Just keep things running.
I was working as a food technician, and we were making some food for the Apollo project, foods that would be eaten without any cooking or heating. One day, I got the summons to go up to my boss's office, and there was a man sitting in the chair facing my boss, and I was introduced to him as Ralph Plaisted. And my boss said, Ralph is going to lead an expedition to the North Pole, and I'd like you to work with him. Ralph was a pretty blustery guy, and I thought, what kind of a mess am I getting into here? But it was my job.
In Montreal, before they take off, it's essentially a big party. You have all these corporate sponsors, you have Playboy bunnies rolling around, you have the media.
Boy, my jaw just dropped. The Canadians were just party, party, party.
Yes, news conference time. Here it is, about 10 after 4 Eastern Standard Time in the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal.
What do you think was the disadvantage you had last year?
Why did you fail last year? Are there any changes in the food that you're bringing along as compared to last year?
You have a lot of pressure mounting to show that we're not just some bumbling guys from Duluth. Like, we're going to make this.
The tension was building at the airport, and so we were glad to get on the airplane and finally take off and be on our way.
Roger, 415.
It's a dicey landing. There's no runway here. It's just rock and ice.
Just about touchdown. Oh, wow, is it rough stuff. I think this is the roughest plane ride I've ever had.
I didn't want to get off the plane.
The cold hits you like a wall, and you are brought to reality so quickly. And there's really nothing there. That plane disappears, it's gone in a flash, it doesn't want to be there. It's not their dream.
It was just cold and desolate. Base camp was in kind of a tattered state because it hadn't been attended to for a couple of years. The infrastructure was non-existent. We had 2 radio operators, we had a cook, and then we had me. And basically, we were the base camp.
In 1967, Plaisted and the team, they waited for the perfect weather to begin their expedition. The reality is, on the Arctic Ocean, there is no perfect day, so you just need to start because the clock is ticking.
March 7th, 1968 was one of chaos. And Ralph was in a foul mood, and finally he said, okay, we're gonna go. You know, just that. We're gonna go today, now. People were running up and asking, should I bring this? Should I bring that? And he'd say, I don't care, just bring whatever you think you need, and that's it, we're going.
People are throwing stuff in the sleds and they're packing to go, but you realize they have no fuel. No gas for the snowmobiles. The gas was delivered in barrels to Tankery Fjord, about 100 miles south of them.
Placed at this point is beginning to get deja vu. Is this happening all over again? Is the expedition gonna fail a second time?
Somebody comes out and says, don't worry, Ralph, out behind the shack, there's some old drums of fuel, probably left over from World War II. Ralph's response was, well, okay, but what about oil? Oh yeah, well, we found a Caterpillar tractor out there. We drained the hydraulic fluid to mix with the gas.
Finally, this is it. And they take off, we're gonna go.
The cold is real. At these temperatures, you become aware very, very quickly that the Arctic doesn't let you make many mistakes. This country plays for keeps.
Those first few weeks, nothing worked. Snowmobiles didn't want to work. Nothing wants to work at 60 below zero, I can tell you. Nothing. And the human body, least of all.
You're fighting the cold constantly. Here, it's with you 24 hours a day. You sleep with it, you eat with it, you work with it.
I had snow blindness for a few days. If it's all white, you're looking for contrast. That's the way you kind of personally navigate too, right? And that kind of stress can cause such an irritation.
I remember a moment from my dad's diary where they were running out of everything, and my dad just said, why the hell did I agree to come on this trip?
It seemed like a bad dream to me. We were using gasoline that was dirty, full of water and ice, constantly clogging the carburetors. All of this in temperatures of 65 below zero.
The supply problem really became critical, and the party required their supplies every second day.
They're using gas from World War II, and they're using more of it than they anticipated. And as a result, they need to be consistently resupplied.
A 10-mile average per day is going to get you there at the end of April. But what was scary was the first 3 weeks, where we were making like maybe 2 miles average a day.
They were falling behind, and Ralph is angry, anxious, frustrated, and he can't do anything about it.
Ralph was very irate during that time. He was getting on everybody.
He was being kind of demanding to us at the base camp and kind of making it sound like we just we're sitting around drinking whiskey or something.
The guys back at base camp was explaining to Ralph, they're putting every ounce of energy to make us successful. And Ralph, you need to cut them some slack. You're cutting them off, you're threatening them.
He drove those guys so hard. They were just working their tails off at base camp. 18, 20-hour days, physically torturing themselves, trying to make it work.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you don't have a leader like Ralph, it's very easy to get sidetracked. But there's also that point where maybe you pushed it too far.
It was an iron fist, my way or the highway. You do it and you do it now. Unfortunately, when you're on an expedition with a bunch of your friends and buddies, that type of personality doesn't go over too well.
had advice that said, you gotta push your men till they hate you in order to make it. So he was doing that. But Art Aufderheide, who was the more calm and systematic type of guy, stepped in.
He had an agreement with Dr. Aufderheide to say, hey, if I'm out of line, I want you to take me aside and tell me I'm out of line.
My dad finally said, Ralph, you need to value the effort that your men are putting in. Stop driving them so hard. Be more appreciative and be the leader you said you were going to be and that you have been most of the time. And then we'll be successful.
Moving forward from that, Ralph learned how to coordinate radio, airdrop for fuel and food, and they would progress, wait for food and fuel, and then progress again.
You know, that was another part of the expedition that nobody talked about too much. Is that there was very little fuel at Fort Hunt Island for the airplane. That was a big Achilles heel of the expedition.
Ralph knows that the expedition's over if Weldy can't supply them.
Ralph's thinking, holy cow, there's no other airlines up here. We're gonna starve to death.
Without Weldy and his plane, they're doomed.
Plaisted realizes his best chance for getting the fuel is to send his pilot, Welby Phipps, to Tanqueray Fjord and bring it back. So this is really a treacherous flight. They're flying over mountains, really difficult conditions.
Weldy used to tell me it was like flying in a bowl of milk.
Weldy Phipps, he's flying back when he blows the engine. These bush pilots, they have their brain and they have their experience. And between those two, that decides whether they live or die.
So he barely made it over the mountain on one engine.
Weldy was enough of a pilot to limp that plane on past Eureka all the way to Resolute Bay, because that was the nearest place he could get to where he was going to get another engine. Resolute Bay was where they had commercial flights. Weldy called his wife and said, get over to the factory and tell them to send me an engine. And then, oh, by the way, send a technical manual. And they got the engine to the airport. So Weldy got his engine. He's swapping out an engine in 50 below weather out on the tarmac. No one's ever changed an engine outside of the factory.
And now they are out there all by themselves waiting for this motor to be replaced. And it's kind of a scary feeling.
It was pretty precarious. They were scared to death, and I don't blame them.
This ice seems to know that it doesn't want you there, and it'll do its best to keep you from traveling. It'll either try to crush you, smother you, or drop you through and drown you. If you can't do these, the wind will hold you up and try to freeze you to death.
The ice party had run out of fuel, and they had run out of white gas, which they needed to run their cook stove, and they also were running out of food.
And then, just like in '67, the big blow hits.
Weldy was still rebuilding his aircraft when the big blow came. The wind was running 40, 50 miles an hour, and it was snowing sideways, and it was a total whiteout.
We'd sort of expected a blow at the end of the season, you know, but not at the beginning, so it caught us by surprise.
They couldn't travel, they couldn't see, they couldn't do anything but sit in that tent.
During a blow, you worry mostly about whether the tent is going to blow down or not. Because if the tent goes, we go. That little thin envelope of air that the tent provides around you is all that keeps you alive.
found ourselves acting like a bunch of hibernating bears. We were just staying in the sleeping bags for 12, 14 hours a day. And we managed to drag out and go over to Ralph's tent where he'd cook the one meal of the day.
They took books and they would tear out pages and they would hand them to each other to read. And then when you got done reading yours, you gave it to somebody else.
But we were concerned because we'd read about other expeditions where they had big storms like that, and then the ice would break, and it would break right through the middle of their tent, and then you're looking at open water.
They had a lot of time to think, are we going to make it? Are we going to be, buried alive?
If you're stuck in a snowstorm for 6 days, wondering if you can get out to get to supplies or food or if somebody's gonna see you, and you start doubting that you'll ever make it, you'll start doubting that you might even make it off that ice, you're gonna start thinking to yourself and reflecting back on your life.
They weren't sure if when they woke up if they'd still be on an ice floe or if it would disintegrate on them. They weren't sure if they were gonna ever see anybody else again or if this was gonna be the end of it.
It was getting very hairy, like we wouldn't make it. And I'm thinking my kids are going to cry because their dad didn't come home, so then the tears start running and freezing.
When they were plagued with all these problems, it falls on the shoulder of the leader.
Plaisted's out in a situation where he's already failed once. So success, yeah, that's on Ralph's mind, but so is just simply not dying, because that's the more realistic outcome of the situation that he's in.
I feel an obligation to these men. I'm the one that recruited them. I'm the one that convinced them that we could make it to the North Pole.
Ralph said those men were in that tent. That was their family. They needed to stick together, and they needed each other to survive.
And you can sort of feel a moment here where they all just bond together as a team, as guys who are out on this really difficult thing together. They're going to pull for each other, and we're going to do what we need to do to get to the North Pole.
We took a pack. We're staying there until we reach the pole, or you don't come back.
Six days into the big blow, Weldy Phipps installs a new engine and is able to fly 700 miles to the team on the ice and resupply them. If he wouldn't have been able to make that journey, Plaisted and the team, they would have died.
I really believe that standing there was a new inspiration as the sun came up. To let's get on with it, let's get going. Hope renewed with the dawning of a new day, and that's what it was.
After that, for the next few days, they make good progress. But like so often happens in polar travel, their pace starts to fall off.
And so Ralph has a really difficult decision to make.
Ralph is getting quite concerned that they're running out of time. And he realizes now they're going to have to move faster. In order to move faster, they're going to have to move lighter. He has to cut them down from 2 tents to 1 tent. And he has to send some of the guys back, including their snowmobiles and sleds.
You have to basically tell your friends that you really bonded with, who've risked their lives to get to where they are, you're not going to be able to come with us. We only need these 4 guys. That's a tremendously difficult decision to make, but one that comes from the experience that he's gained up to that point.
And so he has the hard place of sending Don Powlick and Art Aufderheide to base camp.
He needed Art to help get the fuel lined up and get everything organized.
The base camp was really an afterthought. We didn't have any hierarchy of who's in charge or who's going to be the boss or who should delineate tasks.
Dr. Aufderheide says, I will fly back. I will go back to base camp.
He understood that his best place was at base camp, getting the logistics organized and the supply line secured.
He needed Don to go back as a radio guy to make sure that the life-saving beacon that had to go in the plane and then out on the ice would function and be reliable and safely get supplies to them.
And this was a great disappointment for Don that he had to come off the ice after traveling all the many miles he did with the party. And I know it was a real heartbreaker for him.
So the 4 men left on the ice party are Ralph, the mechanic, Walt Peterson, navigator, Jerry Pitzel, and lead snowmobiler, Jean-Luc Bombardier.
CJU 942 Mobile 1, this is CJU 942, over.
Things start to go the expedition's way once Don and my dad left the ice. Base camp took shape, fuel was consistent, we could find the ice party, and the weather conditions started to cooperate.
After a day of good running where they made maybe 30 miles or 40 miles, and then they could radio back to the base camp and say, we're this far today, or we're this far today. And the base camp would then get more excited, and they would work harder at what they were doing. Jean-Luc, he would go out first thing and try to find the easiest route headed north. Dad had a lot of respect for Jean-Luc because of his ability to ride like he could and his willingness to do this.
My God, I seen him out there, and holy Christ, he could take a machine and he could find his way through them dams. And I stopped him. I said, you can pick a path better than I can, better than Walt Peterson, anybody. We all agree that you can do it.
Jean-Luc had this uncanny capacity to find ways through the pressure ridges. He was a marvelous scout.
You get so you take more chances because you know you're fighting the calendar.
There's a pretty incredible moment in the story where at one point they encounter a wide expanse of just straight sea, no more sea ice. They're not sure how they're going to cross it. And they realize we can just zoom across and connect these two pieces of ice and not worry about this open expanse of sea. So as they're all sort of moving across, there comes to a point where Walt's snowmobile begins to sink.
He was throwing water up into the sled, the snowmobile was, so it was weighing it down more and more. And he couldn't let go of the throttle and reach back and unhook the sled because then he'd know he'd lose it.
If he went in, he didn't have more than minutes to live.
You know, it was your greatest fear come true.
And Ralph Plaisted saw me. He threw everything down and he put his feet wide apart and he slid his feet. He didn't pick them up and put them down. I said, Ralph, don't, it's black ice, don't.
And he's yelling at him, no, Ralph, it's too thin. Ralph made it to Dad's snowmobile. He grabbed the ski and yanked it.
Because when he got over there to pull the skis, he just touched them. He didn't even pull on them, he just touched them. And off it went.
Dad says he was sure Ralph's guardian angel was holding him by the nape of the neck as he walked across that ice.
This pretty incredible moment where he transforms himself from just a leader of this group to this figure that is, all of a sudden, now he's like one of these classic polar explorers like Robert Peary, who's risked everything for this trip.
He saved my dad's life. They made it.
moving into spring in the northern hemisphere. And so psychologically, the sun is getting higher in the sky. It's getting a little bit warmer. It goes from, 80 below to 60 below, and it starts to feel good. At 50 below, you're like, this is great.
I was getting pretty optimistic about this time because we had a big map on the wall at Ward Hunt. We were plotting their position, on this map, and we're getting closer and closer.
And there's this momentum swelling and building. And everybody is in a state of mind of not if, but when.
When I'd come home and I'd see the map and they're getting closer and closer and closer, and oh man, almost.
As Plaisted and the team start closing in on the North Pole, they start thinking, how did Peary, with his massive team, dogs, and men, make it the way the history books said he did?
Peary said that he made it out and back on his old trail. I don't see how anyone could hold that ice intact for 30 days unless they were God himself.
It became more and more clear that you just don't say, I'm going to stay right on this one longitude line and go directly to the North Pole. You can't do that. The hardest thing on surface travel in the Arctic is maintaining direction.
The thing that people fail to realize is that the journey to the North Pole is probably one of the most arbitrary adventures on the face of the planet. There's no land at the North Pole. The North Pole is just a fixed, imaginary point, 90 degrees north latitude.
You might be there at one instant, and then 2 hours later, that ice may have drifted, and then you're no longer at the North Pole. So it's something you've got to pin down and get authenticated very quickly to say that you were there.
Well, you don't just drive up to a post and say, this is the North Pole. Our navigator, Jerry Pitzel, has been taking constant sun shots.
Jerry Pitzel, the navigator, would take readings to see, okay, got to make adjustment, we got to go this way.
He was inching them closer and closer and closer, taking a reading, figuring out exactly where they were.
Jerry did know his stuff. Jerry knew exactly what he had read. He knew his readings.
The Air Force flies a plane over the pole every day for weather recon, and we had made arrangements that we could contact them on the radio and that they would drop down and authenticate our position at the pole with their instruments.
What do you say on our position, over?
They started making circles and talking to the guys on the ice and said, well, you need to go 26 miles in this direction and then you'll be there. And Jerry says, I don't understand it. Feels like 6 miles that direction, and the Air Force says we need to go 26 miles that direction.
And Jerry got on the radio and said, no, I'm pretty sure I'm right,
He said, no, that's our position. You've overshot it. I just about sank through my parka. I just was shocked. And then they continued on.
Jerry's still taking readings, and they said, Jerry, we trust you. You got us here. Tell us which way to go.
I said, Ralph, here's what we have to do. Go 5 miles on your odometer and set up the tent. I'm aiming them right toward the North Pole.
Again, they take off, start moving again. They get to the location, they get their verification from the weather plane that's flying over.
Lark 47, Lark 47, you are passing directly overhead at the present time. Over.
There's a long silence.
Finally, they figured out that the guy on the Air Force plane had his map turned upside down, or turned around this way, upside down, so he was reading it.
And the navigator counted down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and they're watching the plane approaching 3, 2, 1, 0 as it flies over.
Did you make it?
Right at the North Pole. and the pilot says to them, "Gentlemen, from where you are, all points are south."
From where you stand, gentlemen, everything is south. He was right on the money.
10:30 in the morning was achievement of the North Pole.
And I understand when we reached the pole that there were tears at the base camp.
Yeah, we were totally ecstatic at the base camp, you know. We broke out the liquor and had some toasts.
The first thing they did, they just grabbed each other, went rolling around in the snow, just like kids.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Here's a group of guys from Minnesota, average Joe guys that have this dream that they want to go to the North Pole, and they make it. How cool is that?
They finally were standing on top of the world. My dad achieved what he wanted. He is as happy as a person can ever be, making it to the North Pole with this group of guys.
And then from nowhere, Plaisted gets a call from Charles Kuralt to talk about his adventure.
I made contact with Ralph Plaisted out on the ice and asked him, "Where are you, Ralph?" And heard his reply, 90 north, 90 north.
Kuralt gives him his congratulations, and for Plaisted, really, this is the kind of crowning moment.
For Ralph to be able to connect again with Charles Kuralt on the radio was a big thing for Ralph, you bet.
Plaisted never really got the respect he thought he deserved. To be congratulated by Kuralt, one of the most respected journalists in America, is a pretty good consolation prize.
It was nice getting back to the base camp. Moriarty came out. He had a towel that said on it, "Ralph's big camp out wins."
We had a big party. You know, we drank a lot. Ralph thanked us all and said everybody did a great job and that he'll remember everybody the rest of his life. And it was really emotional, and I remember that really strongly.
I know that we would have never been where we were if it wasn't for a lot of people back here who went out to get the gasoline and get things moving out to the ice party. I owe a deep bit of gratitude, and all of us do. How do you repay these people? And of course, Weldy Phipps, any pilot in his right mind would have left us a month ago. I guess, Weldy, today I could have kissed you, you know? You looked awful good even with the beard.
When our trip was over, somebody suggested, let's go over, I think it was Weldy, let's go over and look in Perry's cairn up on Cape Columbia. So we all got in the aircraft and flew down there and climbed the hill and went up and looked in his cairn.
A cairn is a pile of rocks up there in the north where they put information in, you know, papers and mementos and that, these explorers.
We wanted to convey our respects to someone who had attained the pole previously, and that was Admiral Perry.
And down in there was a tin container. Weldy took the container up and opened it, and in Perry's records, he had claimed that he had traveled 75 miles in one day with dogs. He claimed that he had come back the same road 16 days later. We know both of those are impossible. You can't travel back the same road 16 days later. They disappear sometime between the first and second machines, which are only minutes apart. Not alone travel with dogs. 75 miles in one day in that kind of a terrain? You know.
So Peary, as it turns out, in his journal, claimed that he'd made nearly quadruple the mileage in his last 130 miles than he'd made in the entire trip. Realistically, an impossible feat.
It was physically impossible for him to make it back in that many days. There was nothing proving that he was ever there.
When we got to the cairn, there was no question of us trying to usurp his title of attainer of the pole. But at that point, we knew that we were the first overland authenticated achievers of the pole.
They flew the whole group into Minneapolis Airport. In fact, I remember my dad with tears in his eyes, and also with gratitude that he did make it and he did come back to us. I always knew my dad was special, but now it was just extra special.
I mean, talk about being proud. My dad was so proud of the guys that he went with.
I think that what these guys did is very significant for us folks here in Minnesota. This was Minnesota's moon landing.
Ralph thought this was going to be a great big deal. When they got back, there would be, ticker tape parade in New York or something.
But that's not what happened.
Just before they actually achieved the pole, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. Once they get back, Robert Kennedy is assassinated. At the time, the news cycle isn't necessarily one that's going to be dedicated toward an achievement like this.
Another big problem in the Plaisted expedition not really getting any additional exposure was Ralph's own acrimonious relationship with National Geographic.
National Geographic was one of the first folks to approach Ralph and say, "We want to buy your story." And he said, "No."
He was really adamant. You didn't want us before, you don't get us now.
And Ralph said to me later, he said, I told him off. He said, I might eat crow after this, but they weren't about to get that film, the way they treated us.
Didn't help that National Geographic was tied to Peary's narrative of reaching the pole first. They wouldn't even release any of Peary's journals to get analyzed.
Because they were such dire Peary supporters and fans, I can't imagine how they would have put the story together without damaging the image of Peary.
I do believe that Peary fibbed for a variety of reasons. The stakes were high,
And so the Plaisted story just kept falling farther and farther into obscurity.
It's not in the history books. Nobody knows about this. What happened? How come nobody knows? This is a historical event. These guys were the first to cross the ice to the pole, and nobody knows.
Just got buried. And I don't think them being amateurs, essentially, probably helped that. They were forgotten because they could be forgotten.
And then, in 1989, everything changes. And astronomer Dennis Rollins starts digging into Peary's journals and the research around his expedition.
Astronomer Dennis Rollins does not agree that Peary ever made it to the pole. He argues that Peary would have had to sled and walk the final 135 miles in an unbelievably short time, and that he did it without credible witnesses and a very skimpy recording of compass and steering readings.
Are you absolutely certain that Admiral Peary did not make it to the North Pole? 100%.
Personally, I am.
If Admiral Peary did not, then who was the first person?
It has to be Ralph Plaisted.
Time now for another trip up north, sponsored by Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. Tonight, it's way up north. In fact, it's to the North Pole. History books will tell you that Robert E. Peary was the first to go there by land in 1909. But they'll be rewriting the books now and replacing Peary with Minnesotan Ralph Plaisted. Eric Gislason reports.
For 79 years, the world has recognized Commander Peary as the North Pole pioneer. But thanks to a bizarre chain of events and help from Washington, D.C. astronomer Dennis Rawlings, history will be rewritten.
I'd just come back from hunting with my dog and grouse, and my wife said there's a phone call from Washington, D.C., and they want to talk to you, that you're the first man to the North Pole.
Ralph Plaisted and his team were the first to go over the ice to reach the North Pole, unequivocally.
It's interesting to wonder about if there'll come a day when you'll Google North Pole and you'll see Ralph Plaisted's name instead of Robert Peary. You come across that Peary may not have gotten there, but you don't always see Plaisted's name sort of replaced with that. I'm not sure that day's coming, but it should.
I think it wasn't until later years, after I had a few large expeditions under my belt, that I became much more interested in the injustice of the perception of Ralph Plaisted and what he achieved, how he really never got his due. Even when he got his due, it was muted.
We did something pretty significant, and, you know, I just like to be that people would remember that.
What Plaisted couldn't possibly understand in that moment was his expedition was really the beginning of the end. What was starting to happen to that unique environment is that it was forever changing.
Oh, it's all water. It's gone. The ice is gone. You could not do what we did, an expedition to the North Pole. There was no ice to go on, and that's global warming.
Imagine if someone bulldozed Mount Everest and no one was able to climb it again. That's the situation that's occurring in the Arctic Ocean. In 2014, I completed what realistically will be the last ever North Pole expedition from land to the geographic North Pole in history. What I did, what Ralph Plaisted did, will no longer be possible.
To think back when those two gentlemen were sitting here having a couple beers, they took that idea, that dream, and they pushed it all the way to the top of the world.
Ralph Plaisted deserves every single solitary "I'm a true, genuine explorer" that anyone could ever consider giving him. You go out on the Arctic ice pack to the North Pole. If you make that, even if you try it, you're the real deal. And Ralph Plaisted is the real deal.
It started out as a pretty silly dare, but out there on the pack ice, we each and every one of us learned something about ourselves. What more could you ask in this day and age?